Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Greatness Glory podcast, where I talk about the mindset and practices to help you achieve your divine inherent greatness and glory of divinity and divine perfection within. I am working on making these podcasts, especially the solo ones where I speak, more practical and more structured. And this is the first one where I worked on creating some presentation to talk about a fundamental important subject. And I am going to talk a lot about the structure of human beings, universe, cosmology, theology in some way that is relatable and practical. I don't want to talk about some sort of cosmology which is just like a nice philosophy to play with. I want to give you things that you can take advantage of and work with to benefit from. So the subject of today, which I will share with you in details, is this. Across many, maybe hundreds of spiritual and religious traditions in the world, there is a concept which we can call the three selves or the three aspects of a human being. We can also call it the three states of being, the three levels of awareness, consciousness, or mind, and so on. So I'm going to start with the subject, explain it briefly, and then go over each one of these aspects in details and also give you some practices or approaches that you can take advantage of and benefit from. So there is this concept that we have three selves or three aspects of our being which we operate from, and this being discussed very interestingly in many traditions across the world, and you will see and probably be amazed that all of them talked about the same thing, even though with a different language sometimes, but they all refer the same thing. So what are these three selves? Let me share my presentation and start with that. All right. So the three selves are a universal map of human consciousness. And remember, words are limited. Everybody has a different understanding of the words. For example, generally, when you talk about consciousness, people understand it in terms of neuroscience and brain and so on. But the consciousness that we are talking here, it's different. And I'll get into this. So these three selves been discussed in many traditions, including the Hindu, Indian systems of thought, Buddhism, Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, Islamic Sufism, ancient Egyptians, Gnostic Christianity, even modern psychology, especially Carl Jung. And these are the three aspects that we operate from. We can call them three levels of awareness or mind, or with different terms. And understanding these will help you elevate yourself in all aspects of your life. This is the foundation of understanding many things. In the Hawaiian or Huna spirituality, they call this the three selves. And I think that's a more malleable term to use to explain this. We can also call them subconscious mind, conscious mind, and superconscious, pure consciousness, and so on. But I'm going to get into it and you will see what each one means. As you see on the screen, these are the three states. The basic self, which is the subconscious mind, inner child, the conscious or middle self, which is the place of reason and discernment or discrimination, and higher self, which most people may have not experienced, which is our divine nature, also called pure consciousness. So the first one, the basic self. It's also called subconscious mind, personal unconscious, or by the famous psychologist Carl Jung, which is one of my favorites because even though some psychologists been mostly seeing human beings as purely material and dismissing many aspects of us, Jung was deeply involved in Eastern mysticism and adopted many of his ideas in psychology to help human beings with the psychological well-being and evolution from Eastern mysticism like Vedanta, Taoism, yoga, and so on. The subconscious mind, or the basic self, also called in many systems of Indian thought, such as Sankhya, Vedanta, as manas, chitta, and the manas is the root word of actually mind. But remember, mind in the Western thought usually refers to just intellect and memory and so on. But in Hindu systems, and especially in yoga and Buddhism, mind is investigated and explained in many parts. It's actually much more complex. That's why, as I said, even Jung adopted a lot of his ideas from those systems. In the Indian systems, mind known to be having 16 parts, which we don't want to get into all the details. But the subconscious mind, or the basic self, is the place of our programming, our instincts, the inner child, where the emotional imprints, childhood patterns, instincts are held. This is also like our inner animal. There are a lot of things common in children and animals. As we grow up, we learn to reason and make some differences. But when I explain it, you will get why am I giving those examples. This is the place for our survival instincts, emotions, and handles the basic material aspects of life. In some way, in yogic terms, also this can be connected to the lower chakras in a human being. And what are chakras? Chakras are just different dimensions or aspects of us which we operate from. Imagine an electrical system like a computer. It has different parts that are responsible for different functions, or like in the human body, the glands are related to different functions of the body. So this basic self holds our programmings, beliefs, tendencies, and it dictates a lot of our behavior, compulsions, habits, and so on. In some way, we can say this is also where our karma is stored, because karma, unlike what most people think, is not necessarily some sort of reward and punishment system, is stored within us. It's our programmings, what limits us. So let's move on with the second. Conscious self, also called middle self, or in Indian systems called buddhi, which is a very important concept, is the place of reasoning and discernment. While the basic self or subconscious is just like a storehouse of impressions and tendencies and programmings, the middle self or conscious mind is the place that we make decisions and discern between right and wrong. And it's very important also to understand that's the place where we decide to act upon things or not. For example, the basic self, subconscious, might be programmed with different patterns of behavior from childhood and by different events in our lives. But the buddhi, or the conscious mind, is the one that decides if we should act upon those things that pop out of our subconscious or not. For example, I might have certain sensitivities to certain people's behavior. And then somebody says something and I get triggered. If I have developed my conscious mind and my power of decision making, which is also related to willpower and discernment, I can separate myself from those patterns that pop out of my awareness or subconscious storehouse and decide if I should act upon it or not. And this is a very well known thing in psychology. For example, the people that you see do stupid, impulsive things. Imagine somebody who gets angry and does something stupid or kills someone, or somebody who cannot control themselves, and commits a rape or something. Usually, psychology says that these people lack the ability to separate themselves from those instincts and emotions. And when you see something pops out of your subconscious, your behavior, your patterns, your programmings, and when your conscious mind is developed, your intellect is developed, you have this ability to create a space between the compulsion, those impulses, and your decision. But the people who are more compulsive have not developed that conscious decision making, discerning aspect of themselves. That's why they cannot help but acting upon those patterns and emotions. So Carl Jung calls this part of our existence as ego in psychology. This is again where we judge, where we decide and act upon those programming and impulses that come from the basic self or subconscious. So now let's move to the higher self, which is very important for people who want to really achieve the highest evolution of consciousness, self-realization, find out, where did I come from? Where am I going? What is nature of my existence? Am I just like kidneys and livers and like blood, or something more than that? This is the aspect of divinity within us that large majority of people have not experienced, because it's the subtlest aspect of ourselves. This is what separates us from other beings or animals, for example, because animals only have that basic self that we talked about, the instincts. And those two aspects, the middle self and higher self, are only accessible to human beings because of our level of evolution. For whatever reason, our specific brain and the energy centers in the spine, explained by a lot of different systems such as yoga. And unless we experience and become established in this level, we won't be able to become free. And I'm trying to keep this short, but there is so much details. Remember always, there's a saying that little knowledge is dangerous. So make sure you make a decision not to judge the information you receive so quickly, because it's very difficult to explain all of these things in a 1 hour podcast. It takes hundreds of hours to really give so much details. So Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, sometimes calls this the self, or sometimes the collective unconscious. He probably didn't get into a lot of the spiritual aspects because he would be rejected. This higher self is called by thousands of names in different religions and traditions. Like in the Hinduism, it's called Atman, the divine self, or Brahman, Shiva, and so on. This is the spark of divinity within us. This is our transcendental nature. But remember, there are people who will say, oh, okay, if you explain these aspects like this, you're dividing us and you're saying some part of us are divine, another part of us is not divine. Hindu systems like Vedanta, this is a very important concept. Truth is seen from two angles. One is the relative angle and one is the absolute angle. From absolute angle of seeing things, everything is divine and everything is God. But from relative aspects, when we look, let's say, from below to above, from the gross material aspect of us to our subtle aspect, then we are speaking from our individual limited nature. And in this way, we divide things like saying, okay, we have an animal nature, we have an intellectual nature, and then we have a divine nature. But this doesn't mean that one is like bad or the other one is more divine or something. It just shows this analogy that we can be any of them. We can experience ourselves as any of them. And when we are stuck in emotions and instincts and even intellect, then we remain limited. We cannot achieve our divine perfection. This higher self is the spark of divinity within us, which we can merge into. But to really speak from the absolute level again, there's nothing to achieve. There's nothing to get to. All the talks about merging with God or enlightenment, so on. We talk about those things from a relative aspect, saying that we want to become that, but we are already that. So many religions say it's just illusion that makes it look like we are separate. So remember this thing about the relative angle of seeing the truth and the absolute angle of the truth. Because yeah, everybody can say, yeah, I'm divine, I'm one with the universe of God or whatever. But if it's not really in your experience, then it doesn't mean anything. So this higher self, which I'm taking a little bit more time to speak about, because obviously it's more subtle and we have not experienced a lot of it, is called also pure consciousness. This is the most important thing to understand in spirituality. What this pure consciousness mean? When we talk about consciousness, we're talking about the aspect of ourselves which is transcendental and beyond everything. If we consider ourselves to be only body, yes, then we suffer with the body. Whatever happens to body, we suffer with it, and the body finally gets sick, die, and whatever. If we consider ourselves to be our intellect and our illusory identity, then we are stuck in an identity which is not real. Identity is not real. It's something that is gathered from outside, from parents, school, society, and so on. But when we speak about pure consciousness, we're talking about that aspect of us that actually contains everything. It's beyond everything. When you experience yourself, only when you experience yourself beyond the body and identity and mind, then only you can be free. Otherwise, you keep suffering with whatever that happens to your mind and body. The closest example I can use to explain pure consciousness is space. You see, a space is empty, at least relatively as we experience it, but it contains everything. But whatever happens to the contents of the space doesn't affect the space. So consciousness in spiritual terms is like that. If you realize that, oh, actually, you're beyond all this mind, body, matter in your subtlest aspect, and you become established in that awareness, then you can become free. This is the goal of all religions and spiritual traditions. We can say that body and mind are extensions of you, but they are not you. They are like tools which you can use, but the cause of suffering in human life is that we identify ourselves with the flesh, body, and our illusory identity, and we suffer. The goal of yoga, Buddhism, Kabbalah, Sufism, Gnostic Christianity, and all religions, if you understand the core of them, is that you understand that you are not flesh, you are not material, you are not body and mind. These are just tools, bodies, extensions of you, which you are experiencing this reality using them, but they are not you. So the goal is to use your conscious self to manage and purify, clean your basic self tendencies, subconscious, karma, and so on. So you can become more free to ascend and experience yourself as the higher self. Now, this higher self is called by different names in different traditions: monad, oversoul, divine spark, inner being, and so on. So again, the goal is to go through the spiritual process and the process of personal development in some way and experience yourself as that pure, free, formless consciousness. And I have a bunch of videos and like podcasts that I talked about this. And if you want to understand what is pure consciousness, the best system to study is Advaita Vedanta, non-dual Vedanta, which extensively explains what is pure consciousness and provides the methods for you to experience it, or yogic systems, and so on. So I want to move on to the next slide and show you that these three selves, these three states, are explained across the world from many traditions. And that's the beauty of it. And that's the interesting part, that you see different cultures, different religions, traditions, they have all found the same truth. Even maybe they have not ever met, thousands of years ago, from this part of the world and to the other end of the world. In the next slide, I'll show you this comparison table, which took me many hours to put together, just to show that there is a oneness of truth in almost all religions and spiritual traditions that are authentic. As you see on the screen, I have included many systems. For example, in Kabbalah, the basic self is called nefesh, conscious self is called ruach, and higher self is called neshama. The same thing in Sufism, very similar. Nafs, which is ego, qalb, which means also heart, and it's the place of the discernment, and so on. The ruh, which means spirit, and so on. In Advaita Vedanta, manas and chitta indicate this level. Buddhi, as I mentioned, the conscious self, and Atman, the pure consciousness. So I also included a few other systems of Indian thought, which are some of the most powerful and elaborate systems of explaining the human consciousness and human beings. So I'm going to skip those few and mention the other ones. You see in the Huna Hawaiian mysticism, this is explained in this way again. the three states, the basic self, subconscious emotional self, inner child, the conscious self, the reasoning self, and the divine intuitive self. In Taoism, this is explained as Shin, Yi, and Shen. In ancient Egyptian mysticism, as Ka, Ba, and Ak. And in Gnostic Christianity, as Hylic, Psychic, and Pneumatic. And you see in Hermeticism, Buddhism, and finally in the teachings of Carl Jung, the psychologist, explained as personal unconscious, shadow complexes, ego, the conscious self, and the self, which is pretty close to the same concept in Jung's teachings. So here is the interesting part. When you look at this table, you'll see when the average human being thinks, oh, my religion is the only path to truth, or even the spiritual seekers, this path is the most accurate divine path to truth. You see, all of them are talking about the same thing. Where does this conflict come from, where different people think only their path is true? You know, if you look outside for answers, most of the time you become more confused. But when you turn inward, you will find the same truth everywhere. This is the challenge with religion and spirituality. Maybe 99%, maybe 95% of religious followers and spiritual seekers, they are just like playing with beliefs and theoretical knowledge. Very, very few have really gone into the inner world and experienced these existential spiritual truths for themselves. If everybody went inside, then they would all see the same truth. You know, if you open, for example, a person's body in Africa or open it in England, they have the same body organs. But if you just keep talking about them without really having any experience of them or really seeing them, then you can come to a lot of, conflicts and confusions. This is why, the great Sufi Hafiz said that the war of 72 nations is all an excuse. They didn't see the truth and they got stuck in myths. This is a beautiful poem. Mentions that because they didn't see the truth, they just like to play with philosophies. My religion is better. And everybody thinks that just because they read the scriptures, they understand what it means, while it can mean many things. And that's even if that scripture is really intact. And even if it's intact, it's translated really accurately. So we need to start really questioning things and not think that, oh, just because we think we know, we know. There is a huge difference between believing and knowing. For example, you know that you exist. You know that you have a hand, for example. And I don't need to tell you you have a hand. You don't need to believe in it. Do you believe that you have a hand, or do you know that you have a hand? So spiritual process is also the same thing. If you really experience it, not to hallucinate, you know, but really experience it for yourself, you see the truth. But if you haven't experienced, you just start fighting with others, saying my religion is better, my path is more accurate, and so on. Because true religion and spirituality is not about belief. This is a big misunderstanding, especially in many of the Abrahamic religions, that just have faith and blind faith and so on, and just accept whatever the scripture or the most of the time religious authorities tell you. But if you are a seeker, then only you can have the possibility of finding the truth. But if you're just a believer, you could be believing in many things and not getting anywhere. The belief might give you a sense of confidence and makes you feel good if you think, okay, I'm doing something good, and then when I die, I meet God. Maybe it gives you confidence and prevents you from being depressed or something, and gives you a direction, which is okay, but it also freezes your mind and prevents you from experiencing the truth as it is. All right. Now let's move into showing you some basic ways you can use these three aspects to benefit yourself and grow in life and spirituality. So moving to next slide here. This slide, I already talked about it. Next one, the practical applications working with the three selves. So let's talk about the basic self. This is actually very, very important. As I said, none of these aspects is to be rejected or say it's bad. It's stupid to think like that. This is our subconscious mind. This is our where our problems exist, where our limitations exist, where our limiting beliefs to abundance, health, happiness exist. This is where our compulsions exist. This is where, shamanism, they call it shadow or the underworld. This is the part of ourselves that is not in our awareness. In many research, they have come to this conclusion that 99% plus of our mind is subconscious, which means almost all of your mind is out of your access. It's controlling you. That's why Carl Jung said healing is to bring unconscious to conscious. It's only when you bring the light of consciousness, awareness, or that intellect in some way to those areas that are dark, then you can see your limitations and change them. Without seeing anything, you cannot do anything with it. So when we talk about the basic self, we're also talking about the storehouse of your patterns of behavior and emotions and your life issues. Here are three brief ways that you can work with the basic self. The first one is the importance of questioning. See, questioning is very, very powerful tool to make a change in your thinking and emotions and behavior and beliefs. And I talk about this a lot. There is some magic in questioning. When you question a behavior or a thinking, you actually bring that light of awareness into it and you start making a change in that. For example, somebody treats you in a specific way and you get triggered and you say, oh, it is because this guy insulted me. But same situation, same person might do the same thing to another person and that person might not care at all. It's because your specific basic self subconscious mind is programmed because of your past experiences to react in a specific way to a specific trigger. So by power of questioning, you can increase your self-awareness and commit changes in your subconscious programming. You could ask, for example, why is this guy's behavior triggering me? And don't expect this to be like an instant miraculous cure. You need to keep working on it like this. So you might go into silence and relax and ask yourself. And a lot of time, a lot of things, programs come out to your conscious mind. Why do people go to therapy? This is what they do. Talking to somebody, bringing the unconscious thoughts that create the unhappiness and depression and such, and changing it. Or I talk a lot about limiting beliefs as well. Why is it that you go to relationship and more relationships and you experience the same issues? Or why, regardless of how much hard work you're putting in, you're not getting what you want? a lot of it has to do with our limiting beliefs that block us, our fears, or resistance, and so on. Fear of success, fear of failure, and so on. But use the power of questioning. Some ways you can use questioning is just to ask, why am I getting triggered? What specifically about this person's behavior is triggering me? How can I be more, aware and not react next time? Or about the beliefs, you can contemplate on what is the beliefs or the pattern that preventing me from taking action or creating these issues in my life. Sometimes some beliefs come up. I mentioned this before. You can ask, is this true? Am I absolutely certain this is true? These two questions are so powerful. A lot of time, just by asking these two questions, you will see majority, if not all of your beliefs are not true. Is just stories that you tell yourself, and you keep yourself unhappy and limited. Second thing is that the subconscious mind, the basic self, is called also the inner child. The child, as well as animals, like if you had pets or you had children, you see they're not operating based on a lot of reason and consciously doing things. They operate by emotions and instincts. So when you want to communicate with your inner child, first of all, you should never be invasive and pushing. You should always treat your inner child with kindness, as you would a loved one, like a kid or a pet, and communicate with the language of emotions. Tell your inner child that you're loved, you're safe, I love you, I'm here to help you. So we use our middle self, conscious self, the intellect, to make changes in our subconscious mind. So here's why this three selves analogy is important. The inner child doesn't respond to complex logic. It operates by emotions, the tone of your talking, your attitude, safety, instinct. So you got to use simple suggestions and a gentle, caring attitude to communicate. You can put your hand in your heart and close your eyes and intend to communicate with your subconscious, your inner child, and talk to it as you would talk to your kids, with love and care. Use the language of images, imagination, feelings, more than you would use logic. You don't communicate with the adult the same way that you communicate with the kid, right? So the third point, this is one of my favorites, is that the basic self is also the place of instinct and intuition. And if you read my book, Art of Balance, there's a section that I talk about how to develop your intuition. For example, to find out what type of diet serves you best to make your cognition and mind most powerful and your body healthy and give you the most energy. And the best way is to develop your intuition to see that. So let's say you would go into silence and communicate with your subconscious basic self, and like close your eyes, relax, put your hand on your heart, and ask it, like, what kind of diet is best for me? Or when you want to take a meal, you can just like connect your emotions. People talk about gut feeling. That's also related to the communication from your basic self. Just see what it tells you, but remember, it doesn't talk in a language. It talks in the language of emotions, feelings. The signals are emotions and like feelings that come. It's like a feeling of yes or no, or repulsion or attraction. So now I move to developing the conscious self. So here are some ways among many that you can use to develop your conscious self: reasoning, discernment, which is very important, especially when you go to yogic sciences and Vedanta and Buddhism and so on. The ability of discernment is critical for achieving enlightenment. One of the ways that you can increase this awareness is to practice stillness and mindfulness, which most people do through meditation or yogic practices, Tai Chi. Just being present and being conscious, being aware without thinking too much, but just being clear in your head. Like a feeling that sometimes you don't have a lot of worries at some moments and you're having a peaceful time, and then you're just present. That's important to develop that state by meditation and being in silence, and just go for a hiking or something and be present, just feel the way that your body is moving and so on. And I talked about this a lot before also. So the second thing you can use is this important thing which I mentioned about discernment, or in Sanskrit, Viveka. It's very important that when you want something, for example, and first I'm gonna give a materialistic aspect of this discernment. Let's say you want to achieve certain goal, like a specific body weight, but you find yourself acting compulsively and not following the right diet, and instinct or compulsion comes from within. Eat the pizza. The inner child says, let's enjoy the pizza. So you would use your conscious self, your intellect, to reason and discern and see if this is in alignment with your highest good or not. So you ask yourself, is this what I really want? Is this what going to help me in long term to achieve my goals? Don't suppress your emotions. That's also not good. But try to create that space that you don't act upon those compulsion, impulses instantly. You just like take a step back and ask the questions and contemplate. There are many different approaches to this, even for people who are trying to, quit addictions. For example, there is a famous tool, we can say, in psychology, is called the STAR, which tells you basically when a compulsion comes to you, for example, to go drink and smoke or something, then you need to get out of your basic self and emotions and become more logical in that moment so you can control it. So this technique is called a star, which means when people get lost in the ocean, when they're like, navigating a ship or something, and then they look at the North Star to find their way. So this analogy is used to show you that when you become emotional and you want to do something which you don't think is really for your highest good and doesn't align with your goal, you use this technique. So a star means step back and observe, take a few deep breaths, ask if this is what I really want, and R stands for respond in a healthy way. So remember this star. Next time a compulsion comes to you, especially in terms of addictions or changing behavior, remember the star. Take a step back, take a few deep breaths, ask, is this what I really want? Use that Viveka, the discernment, and then when you kind of detach from that turmoil of the emotions, then respond in a healthy way. Instead of picking up a cigarette, go for a walk, do something more healthy. There are hundreds of things that you can do. And lastly, use study and deep contemplation to develop your conscious mind, intellect, buddhi, discernment. This is also an important concept or aspect of spiritual progress. Spirituality doesn't mean that you fill up your head with theories or scriptures, but mindful and goal oriented study of some scriptures can help you to refine your thinking and change your behavior. So let's say you study Bhagavad Gita or Tao Te Ching or some Buddhist sutra or whatever. Don't study just to get excited and say, wow, I know this now. You study to really go very deep and understand the deep meaning of it. Believe me, like one line of many of the scriptures might take you years just to understand its meaning. So the goal is not to just store information, but to contemplate, retrospect, go deep and deeply think about the meaning of it and question, see the same truth from different angles to refine your thinking. So that was for conscious self. Let's go to the next slide and talk about the experiencing of higher self or pure consciousness. Well, this is not as easy as the other two to talk about because it's not within our experience pretty much unless you are in a committed spiritual path. You might have experienced it or gradually have moments of experiencing yourself as that pure consciousness or divine spark. So just to explain about this, I can talk for the rest of my life. That's the goal of spiritual traditions and gurus and so on. But let's briefly talk about a few aspects of it. So first thing is, obviously, you need to walk on a time-tested spiritual path toward realization and freedom. And I have a lot of videos. I talked about different aspects of this. So if you have a path, if you have a tradition that you follow, a guru, which you know a lot of people have achieved the end goal, ultimate freedom, enlightenment, you call it, or whatever, then you mainly it's just that you just follow that path. But you also need to be mindful and a little bit skeptical about what path you follow, because not all paths are pure and not all gurus are authentic. So here is a few other ways to work towards that pure consciousness, divinity. So you can choose the yogic approach that fits your temperament. So I will create a podcast like this, hopefully in future, talking about these yogic paths, which are not really about any tradition, but different aspects. For example, karma yoga is about selfless service and detachment from result of action and really working your way toward enlightenment and God. Jnana is using contemplation and inquiry to get there. Bhakti is path of devotion like Sufism and a lot of Christianity, uh, deep involvement in worship and serving people and so on. And the Kriya is the path of cultivating your inner energies and purifying your inner channels and systems, which especially needs a authentic teacher to be learned from. The next very important thing to realize, whether you want to become successful in life, whether you want to become just happy, just enjoy your life, healthy, have good relationships, and after all, evolving spiritually, if your foundation is not right, there is no hope for success or spiritual evolution. That's why I wrote a book called Art of Balance, where I go over the fundamentals of these things from diet, sleep, rest, relationships, and many things. You can download my book. Audiobook version is available for free at greatnessglory.com, and the book itself is available for like $5.99 on amazon.com. You can even buy the paper back version of the book as well as the Kindle version. So that's an important aspect to understand, that you need to build that foundation. That's why all religions and spiritual traditions start with the foundation. So embrace stillness and meditation. Without meditation or some sort of spiritual practice, that end goal of ultimate freedom cannot be met. And use the power of self-inquiry. Please Google, search about it, find out what are the different ways you can use self-inquiry. I talked about how to use it about beliefs and changing behavior, but spiritually, the main question of inquiry is, who am I? And becoming silent. Many spiritual traditions, the main spiritual practice is just meditating on the question, who am I? And lastly, it's important to nurture our love for finding the truth and achieving more clarity and detachment. Success in spirituality, in many ways, is dependent on how much thirsty you are for finding the truth. That's why Rumi said, seek less water, acquire thirst, and water will boil from everywhere. Basically, he means you need to increase your thirst, and that thirst creates a vacuum within you that attracts the truth, attracts the knowledge for spiritual progress, attracts the guru, guides, all things that you need to you. Again, this is a part of my teachings where I talk a lot about spiritual progress and different paths and so on. Consider subscribing to Greatness Glory YouTube channel and follow me on social media so you can learn more about all these things. Next slide. I want to conclude this podcast by reading a poem from Rumi, which I have loosely translated, that actually talks about these three aspects that we talked about. So let's end with that one. So Rumi says, it is told in sacred sayings that the glorious God created the world's beings in three kinds. One group made entirely of reason, knowledge, and generosity. That is the angels, who know nothing but worship. In their nature, there is no greed, no desire. Pure love lives in them, alive with the light of God. One group is empty of knowledge, like animals fattened by grass. They see nothing beyond the stable and their fodder. From misfortune they are free, and from honor as well. The third is the human being, the child of Adam, half angel in nature and half donkey. The donkey half leans toward the lower world. The angel half is drawn upward toward the high. The other two groups rest in peace, free of conflict, but man suffers, torn between two opposites. It's a beautiful poem that says, as some other Sufi teachings also mention this, that the man is the medium between animal nature and divine nature. So in some way, they're referring to the middle self, right? So if you use your reason and your thinking to move towards your consciousness, which is God within, you can be higher than angels. If you allow your emotions, your compulsions to control your intellect, then you become less than animals. This is what Sufis teach, as well as other traditions. So I hope this analogy of the three selves help you understand yourself better and the world. And I think I mentioned 13 spiritual traditions, which you can rewind the video and see it again. This is a very important concept in many traditions. And I'm planning to create more podcasts like this And it's very important. Please, if this was useful to you and you benefited from, please make a comment, just one word or something, and tell me so I know that I should make more of these things. I really respect the feedback to know what kind of content I should create more. So I have a lot of much, much more and deeper things that I want to share with you. I appreciate all the support and subscribing and everything. And may the consciousness higher self bless you.